Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we've got another power rankings video, week 17 of our power rankings video, and the last one we're doing for a couple of weeks. We saw some very interesting shifts. We'll see if there's new number one, but there's definitely a couple of new teams entering the top 10 in the power rankings this week. Stay tuned for the entire video to see who's 10 through 1 coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do it without all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. I'm going to try and hit between 675 and 700 before the trade deadline, so definitely don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming out in the very near future. So today's video is a power rankings video, week 17 of our power rankings series. This is also going to be my last one for the next 3 weeks. So the 2 middle weeks in February, there is no hockey games. It makes no sense to do a power rankings video. So for next week and the week after, there will be no power rankings video on Tuesday. The last week of February, I will bring the power rankings back, and we should have a power rankings weekly until the end of the season, and then probably into the playoffs as well. But just to let you guys know, there will be no power rankings over the next 2 weeks. So we do have week 17 of the power rankings this week. We'll start off with the 3 honorable mentions as we usually do, and then go over to the top 10 of the power rankings. So with the 3 honorable mentions, you've got some very interesting ones here. So first, someone who I put back into the honorable mentions after taking them out a little while ago, who's not ranked last week, is at the 3rd honorable mention spot, and that is the Boston Bruins. The Bruins had a pretty solid week last week. They went 2-0-2 and are on a 6-game point streak right now. They started off the week with a bad overtime loss to the worst team in the Eastern Conference in the Rangers. Then they got an overtime win over Nashville, doubled up the Philadelphia Flyers and handled them quite easily, and finished off the week with a blown 4-1 lead and lost 6-5 in a shootout. Not great news there for Boston to end the week and begin the week, but still, they only had extra time losses. They had a point all 4 of their games, got 6 out of possible 8 points. So I don't think that's anything bad for the Boston Bruins. They're still in a wild card spot. They're still in a pretty good position in the Eastern Conference. So with all that said, I'm going to put them into the honorable mentions here at the 3rd honorable mention spot, and they're looking pretty good to potentially make the playoffs. Offensively, team's looking good with Pastrnak, with Geeky. Defensively, McAvoy's doing well, and that Swayman's doing well. So very interesting out there, but the Bruins had a point in 4 out of 4 games this week, and that is why I'm putting them up to 3rd honorable mention spot. The 2nd honorable mention spot is actually a team who last week was 9th in the power rankings, but because of a couple other teams being a little bit better than them, I bumped them out of the power rankings for this week and into the honorable mention category, and that is the Anaheim Ducks. The Ducks, they didn't have a terrible week, but they didn't have a great week either. They went 1-1-1. Started out the week in the second half of a back-to-back with a bad 7-4 loss to the Edmonton Oilers that ended their losing streak. It wasn't overly great. They then lost to the Vancouver Canucks 2-0, so once again, it was not really great there to finish up their West Canadian road trip, as they lost to both Edmonton and Vancouver, but they finished out the week with a pretty big win over the Pacific leaders in the Vegas Golden Knights. So that win thus had them up to 61 points. They're within 3 points of top spot in the Pacific Division, and they're looking quite good. They were recently on a 7-game win streak. I think they've won 8 of their last 10 games, even after the 2 losses this week. So still, Ducks are looking pretty good. They're in a playoff spot. They're close to top spot in the Pacific Division, so I'm not going to move them out completely, but because they did lose a couple of their games this week, I am bumping them to the 2nd spot in the honorable mentions, but they're still looking pretty good to make the playoffs. Offensively, the team's looking pretty good with Gauthier, with Kreider. Defensively, not looking too shabby with a guy like Mitnyakov. And net, Dostal continues to be a really solid goaltender for the Ducks. So very interesting note there, but the Ducks did lose a couple of games to Pacific rivals this week, so that's why I'm bumping them down to 2nd spot in the honorable mentions. And the 1st honorable mention spot this week is the Columbus Blue Jackets. They were in the honorable mentions last week too, but couldn't really bump them out. I even moved them a tiny bit higher in the honorable mention category because they went 3-0-0. They started the week by taking down the Philadelphia Flyers in a massive Metro Division rival game, 5-3, and then won back-to-back games against 2 of the worst teams in the Central Division, in the Blackhawks and the St. Louis Blues. So once again, they didn't play anyone too difficult this week, but still, they've won, I think, was it 9 of 10 games, 10 of 11 games, something like that, and especially since Rick Bowness has taken over, like the Jackets have been playing lights out. They're within 4 points of a playoff spot in the Metro Division. So the Jackets are not out of it yet by any means, and they're looking pretty gosh dang good. So because of all of that, I'm going to keep them in the honorable mentions, and who knows, maybe the next time we do power rankings, if they have a couple of really good games before this Olympic break, they could be in the top 10 of the power rankings. So really good stuff there for our Blue Jackets, but they're ever so close to a playoff spot, and that's why I'm keeping them at the honorable mention category. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with Monahan, with Marchenko. Defensively, not looking too shabby with a guy like Matejchuk, and in net, Greaves has been pretty good for the Jackets. All in all, Jackets swept this week, going 3-0, and that is why they are going to stay in the honorable mention category. So those are all honorable mentions. And lastly, we're going to go to the top 10 teams in the power rankings. Now, the 10th team in the power rankings this week is a team who extended their winning streak to 6 games and their point streak to 9 games, entering Monday's game action. And that is the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Penguins, who are currently second in the Metro Division with a 20-14-11 record, were able to extend their winning streak from last week to bump them up into the honorable mention category with 2 games that they played this week, as they took down the Chicago Blackhawks quite handily, 6-2, and then the worst team in New York had a big lead, nearly blew it, but held on and took down the Rangers 6-5. So once again, not overly impressive games from the Penguins because they are playing some lower end teams, but they did what they need to do, got 4 possible 4 points to a possible 2 wins, gained a little bit on the New York Islanders, and they're still in a pretty comfortable position at 3rd spot in the Metro Division. So because of the win streak, the point streak, all of that stuff, still being a top 3 team in the Metro Division, I'm going to put the Penguins at the 10th spot in the power rankings. I think they've earned it. Offensively, teams doing pretty good with Crosby, with Malkin, with Rust. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Carlson and Shea. And in net, Skinner's been doing great, and so has Seelov. So very interesting note there, but the Penguins have been heating up as of late, and I think it's deserved that they go back into the top 10 in the power rankings. At the 9th spot in the power rankings, after going undefeated last week as well, is the Seattle Kraken. The Kraken have been heating up as of late. They're currently won 5 of their last 6 games, and they are not looking too bad. The Kraken are heating up at the right time, and we'll see how they do before the Olympic break, but still really good stuff there from the Kraken. They're up to a 26-19-9 record. Yeah, I'm going to put them in the top 10 in the power rankings. I think they deserve it. Like, they've been in and out all season long, but I still think the Seattle Kraken team could actually make the playoffs. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with McCann, with Beniers, with Catan. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Ricker Evans and Adam Larson. And in net, Joey Decord continues to be brilliant, as does Philip Grubauer. So very interesting out there. But the Kraken, they had a really solid week, and they're going to be put at the 9th spot in the power rankings. Another team who's entering the power rankings for the first time in a little bit. At the 8th spot in the power rankings is the New York Islanders. They had a really solid week. They went 3-1-0. They started out the week with a pretty impressive victory over a hurting Philadelphia Flyers team. Then won back-to-back games against their New York rivals in the Rangers. So really impressive stuff there. They sweep the season series against the New York Rangers. And then they did end the week with a bad loss to the Nashville Predators 4-3, which wasn't overly good, but still. They got 6 out of possible 8 points, 3 out of possible 4 wins. They retained 3rd spot in the Metro Division this week. So all in all, really good stuff there from the New York Islanders as they continue to keep on going and trying to get a playoff spot this year, which is looking pretty good because they still have a 4-point lead on Columbus and Washington. So very interesting note there. The Islanders took care of business against the teams they need to take care of business against. So really good stuff there from the Islanders, and I think they deserve the 8th spot in the power rankings with a 30-20-5 record. Offensively, teams looking pretty good with Barzal, with Duclair, with Horvat. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Schaefer and Pulak, and then net, Sorokin's been pretty good. So all in all, solid stuff there from the Islanders, but after not being ranked last week, they're now up to 8th in the power rankings, 7th in the power rankings, and bumping up from the 10th spot last week after a pretty solid week going undefeated is the Montreal Canadiens. They went 3-0-0 last week. The Habs started out the week with a very impressive overtime victory over the Vegas Golden Knights. Then they absolutely throttled the Colorado Avalanche / Quebec Nordiques 7-3, followed that up with a huge revenge game over the Buffalo Sabres after losing 2 times over the last 2 weeks. They were able to take down Buffalo 4-2. So a huge win against Atlantic rival, beat both the Pacific and the Central team leaders, and they are looking phenomenal. Offensively, teams clicking with Suzuki, with Kapanen, with Caulfield. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Hudson and Struble, and in net, Montembeault and Dobes have been pretty good. So all in all, solid stuff from the Montreal Canadiens. They're now 3rd spot in the Atlantic Division. They're in a pretty good position to make the playoffs again this year, and that's why I do have them bumping up to 7th spot in the power rankings. Now 6th spot in the power rankings with a 32-14-9 record, also after going undefeated with a 3-0-0 record this week, is the Dallas Stars. They get bumped up from 8th spot last week to 6th spot. This week it's an impressive jump there from the Dallas Stars as they went 3-0-0. They started the week with a very narrow victory over the St. Louis Blues. Then they took down the Vegas Golden Knights in a shootout 5-4 after blowing a 3-goal lead, and then they were able to hold on and beat the Utah Mammoth. So 3 very narrow games, but the Stars were able to come out on top on all of them. They've now won 5 of 6, and they are actually gaining on the Colorado Avalanche for top spot in the Central Division. So really good stuff there. The Stars are still one of the best teams in the entire NHL. They're still a really good team. They're starting to find their stride again after a rough patch in January. And because of all that, I'm going to bump them up to the 6th spot in the power rankings. Offensively, Duchesne, Robertson, Bach, all doing really good offensively. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Heiskanen and Harley. And in net, Andre's been pretty good. So all in all, really solid stuff there from the Dallas Stars as they get bumped up to 6th spot in the power rankings. 5th spot in the power rankings, staying there from last week, is the Buffalo Sabres. The Sabres had a pretty good week this week. They went 2-1-0. We talked about their one loss. They did end the week with a bad loss to the Montreal Canadiens after they did beat the Canadiens over the past couple of weeks. But before that, they did take down the Los Angeles Kings 4-1, where Alex Tuch got a hat trick, and they took down the Toronto Maple Leafs in an impressive 7-4 fashion earlier in the week too. That might have ended the Toronto Maple Leafs season. So very interesting to note there, the Buffalo Sabres are a pretty gosh dang good team, and they're still one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. They're I think only 2 points back of 3rd in the Atlantic and 3 points back of 2nd in the Atlantic. So all in all, Buffalo's a pretty good team. They're finally finding their stride, and I think this is finally the year they're going to end their playoff drought. So because of all of that, and still going 2-1-0 this week, I'm going to keep them as the 5th team in the power rankings. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with Tuch, with Quinn, with Doan. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Dahlin and Byram. And in net, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen before he got injured, and as well Alex Lyon have both been great for the Buffalo Sabres. So all in all, really solid stuff there from Buffalo. They stay at 5th in the power rankings. 4th in the power rankings, bumping down from the 2nd spot last week, is the Colorado Avalanche. They didn't have a great week. They started the week with a bad loss to the Ottawa Senators 5-2. Then they lost to the Montreal Canadiens 7-3. So 2 really bad losses before they bounced back and shut out the Detroit Red Wings 5-0. So really bad stuff there. They're losing ground to Minnesota and Dallas. They're not on pace to break Boston's 135-point record anymore, and they've definitely hit a rough patch in January. So I still think they can recover, but it seems that the Atlantic Division is just their kryptonite because they cannot do well against the Atlantic Division. But still, even though they only had 1 win this week, they're still points-wise the best team in the entire NHL. So I'm not going to move them down too much, but I think they do deserve to go down to 4th after what was pretty much a bad week there from the Avalanche. Offensively, team's still decent with guys like Nichushkin, Lehkonen, McKinnon. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Makar and Taves. And in net, Scott Wedgwood is still doing pretty good in net. So really good stuff there from the Avalanche, but they do fall to 4th in the power rankings. Staying at 3rd in the power rankings from last week is the Carolina Hurricanes. They have a 34-15-6 record, and they went 2-0-1 last week. Started out the week with a very, very impressive 5-4 victory over the Utah Mammoth, as the Hartford Whalers came back, scored 3 goals in the last 2 minutes to go from 2 goals down to winning the game in regulation. First time in NHL history that's ever happened. Then they blew a 3-goal lead to lose 4-3 in overtime to Washington, and then they blew a 2-goal lead against the Kings, who recovered and won 3-2 in overtime against the Los Angeles Kings. So 2-0-1, not a half bad record there from the Carolina Hurricanes. They're still the best team in the Metro Division, one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. So even though they did blow a 3-goal lead, which was quite bad to the Washington Capitals, I'm going to keep them as the 3rd spot in the power rankings. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with Aho, Svechnikov, Jarvis. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Gossel, Spear, and Slavin. And in net, Brendan Boosie continues to find ways to win games for that Carolina Hurricanes team. So very interesting note there, but the Canes, they go 2-0-1 last week, and they're still in a pretty good position at the 3rd spot in the power rankings. 2nd spot in the power rankings, bumping up from last week's number 4 spot, is the Minnesota Wild. At 32-14-10, they had a pretty solid week because they went 3-0-0, just like the Stars and the Habs did. They started out the week with a very narrow shootout victory over the Chicago Blackhawks, overcome a 3-goal deficit to come back and take it from the Chicago Blackhawks. Then east past the Calgary Flames 4-1, and then absolutely destroyed the Edmonton Oilers 7-3. It was not even close. So very interesting note there, the Wild had 3 very impressive games, come from behind victory, cruise past the Flames, and destroy the Edmonton Oilers. So because of all of that, I think they deserve to go to the 2nd spot in the power rankings. At this point, them and the Stars are a lot more of a harder team at this point than the Colorado Avalanche, and the Wild are only 5 points back of the Colorado Avalanche, even though the Avs do have 3 games in hand. So very interesting note there, but I think the Wild deserve to go up to the 2nd spot in the power rankings after what was a pretty gosh dang solid week. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with guys like Kaprizov, Boldy, Johansson. Defensively not looking too shabby with guys like Faber and Hughes. And in net, Alstead and Philip Gustafson have both been doing pretty good. So all in all, really solid stuff there from the Wild, as they are the second team in the power rankings. And then the number one team in the power rankings, again, for the third consecutive week after going 3-0 this week, is the Tampa Bay Lightning. They had once again another fantastic week, going 3-0. They're up to a 35-14-4 record, and they still lead the Atlantic Division. So really solid stuff there from the Bolts. They started out the week with a shutout victory over one of the NHL's hottest teams since the start of January, Utah, 2-0. Then they took down the Winnipeg Jets 4-1, which was very impressive, before they wound up finishing the week with a 4-goal come-from-behind victory, largest in franchise history, to take down the Boston Bruins 6-5 in a shootout in the Stadium Series. So all in all, really solid stuff there from the Bolts. Like, they go 3-0 in this impressive stretch here for the Bolts. They win the Stadium Series game, they beat the Red Hot Mammoth, and the Bolts are looking really good. They're top spot in the Atlantic Division. They're one of the best teams in the NHL, so I think they're going to retain top spot in the power rankings for the next couple of weeks. So very interesting note there, but I think the Bolts deserve to remain top spot in the power rankings. The offensive team's doing pretty good with Gensel, Kucherov, with Gord, defensively not looking too shabby, with guys like Radish and Moser, and in net, Vasilevsky continues to be Vasilevsky and be really good. So all in all, really solid stuff there from the Bolts, but they go 3-0 last week, stay top spot in the Atlantic Division, and I'm going to keep them in top spot in the power rankings. Definitely very interesting note there. Just to let you guys know, here are the teams who took out of the power rankings from last week and the teams who I put in. Now, Detroit, who was 6th in the power rankings last week, I took out after what was a rather sour week. The Mammoth, who were 7th in the power rankings, I also took out after a pretty bad week. And the Ducks, who were 9th in the power rankings, I dropped to the honorable mention spot. So those three teams all came out of the power rankings. While Pittsburgh, who's 10th and was an honorable mention last week, Seattle, who was 9th and not ranked last week, and the Islanders, who are 8th and were also not ranked last week, all went into the power rankings. So those were the switches I made in the power rankings this week. But just to recap, here's my top 10 power rankings for week 17 of the NHL season. So the 10th spot, you have Pittsburgh, 9 is Seattle, 8 is NYI, 7 is Montreal, 6 is Dallas, 5 is Buffalo, 4 is Colorado, 3 is Carolina, 2 is Minnesota, and the number one team this week is the Tampa Bay Lightning again. So definitely let me know your thoughts on all that down in the comment section below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? And if you do disagree with me, who would be your top 10 of the power rankings in your eyes? Let me know down in the comments. But that's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video and for your to subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this with all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming in the very near future. Also, a blog to what news, rumors, analysis, and for that, so check that out. I'll link to that down in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.